Fueled by Death guest.
I'm sitting here at my desk in my office, and in my right hand, I've got a Death Wish coffee. I don't know what you'd call it, craft, the stainless steel.
Nice.
Love it.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you love it.
I'm drinking the coffee. I love it.
Awesome. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time to talk with us on the show.
Are you a big coffee fan, Ted?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not a connoisseur of coffees and all of that stuff, but I know that it's like there's a couple like donut coffees. I like Tim Hortons coffee. I drink a lot of that in Canada, and I like Dunkin' Donuts coffee. But my favorite coffee is Death Wish.
Oh man, you didn't have to say that.
I think you just got us a raise there, Ted.
I'm blushing now, man.
Well, I'll tell you, it really is. And my wife keeps telling me, she says, "Don't forget to bring that home with you."
Awesome.
So we've finally figured out. Well, shoot, man, we can go online and order it. So that's what we're doing too.
Yeah.
I've got to tell you guys a story about that. Like, the first time I met you guys was at the New York Comic-Con, and I signed some autographs for a bunch of the guys, and you guys said, "Wow, man, we'll send you a care package." And I thought, great. So I'm on the road again, and so my wife calls me and she said, "Honey, there's a box at the front door. It's got a skull and crossbones on it, and it says Death Wish." And she said, what is it? Do you know what this is? I just started laughing. I was like, don't call the police. Nobody's trying to bomb us. I said, it's just coffee. And so, anyway, I thought you guys would appreciate that story.
Oh,
yeah, you can imagine.
Yeah, and then she loves it too.
You can imagine the troubles we have getting through customs sometimes.
Oh, I can imagine.
So to start off the show, I'd love to talk about kind of one of the most current things that's going on with you, and that is the documentary that you and your sons put together, The Price of Fame, which is now available on iTunes.
Right.
And I think it's always incredible when someone who's had a career like yourself, who's done so many different things, kind of does, a retrospective thing and looks back on it. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of came to be? Was it your idea? Was it your son's idea? What was the starting point for the documentary?
Well, I got to back up even further because crisis in my life in 1992. At the height of my fame, and my wife catches me in adultery, and wrestlers were kind of like rock stars, and we lived that lifestyle. And I guess it wasn't that I was unhappy at home; it was filling a void, which is that's not great either.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, it is what it is. And when I was confronted with it, it made me go. It's when I did an about face, it's kind of like I hit the wall and realized that I had put to risk the most valuable things in my life. Yeah. And so that was a turning point for my life. And I never realized it. That was in 1992. And this journey for me and this growth in my relationship with God, for the next 8 years. And then in the year 2000, I walked away from wrestling as a vocation. And, I've been in evangelism for the last 18 years. I've traveled all over the world, churches, prisons, rehab centers, sharing my story and sharing the gospel. And I've written a couple of books. I've actually, you can get a DVD with me sharing my story, from a platform, in a church. But I had never done a movie about it and had never included, the rest of my family. And I met a guy named Pete Fierro. Pete came to interview me, and he was doing the interview as a favor to a friend. And Pete lives in New Jersey, but the greater New York area. And so because he was a fan of mine, he said, I'll go to the interview. Well, the interview is what they call a shoot interview, meaning it's not wrestling storylines, it's real life. And so when you start asking me questions about my real life, I'm going to start telling you about what God has done in it and how it's changed me. And what I didn't know at the time was Pete, in his own words, was the somewhat backslidden son of a minister. His dad was a minister. Wow. And so apparently my story resonated with him, and it kind of got all over him. And Pete's vocation is he does he does wedding video and photography. So he documents weddings. And so he, I'd come back to New York. He'd come and hear me speak, and we developed this relationship. And he just came to me one day and he said, "Ted," he said, "you've told your story, and you've been telling it for some time, but it's never been done in a film. I'd like to do that." I said, "Well, okay, let's give it a go." And then my son came along, put a little twist on that, and kind of like, "Okay, let's tell the story, Dad. It's your story, but let's kind of tell it through my eyes and involve the family." Yeah. And so that's how it happened. And of course, our wish is that the people that see the film will come away with a couple things. Number one, they'll come away with an understanding that fame is not all it's cracked up to be. That like anything else, it has its ups, it has its downs. It's what you make of it, and that you can be as popular as anybody in the world. Everybody knows who you are. You can make a lot of money, and you can be the most empty person on the planet. Yeah. And so, and again, obviously, the answer to all that, as far as I'm concerned, is Jesus Christ, and that's what I continue to do today. And that's basically why we did the film. And the film is, it's out on iTunes. It was on Amazon first, and iTunes. I know that it's been in the top 10 and 20 in the documentary division of iTunes and Amazon. And actually, as we speak, this week, I think, the third or the fourth, maybe it's already the fourth, but this week, I'm not sure the day, but it's going to be released on DVD in Walmart.
Excellent.
Across the country. So, and we're hoping that people will, that haven't seen it, will go buy it and watch it, and maybe there's something in it for you and me and everybody.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and even like watching the little bit that I got to, when you talk about your father, it's so touching, man, and that really speaks to me and really hit home, and watching you move by that. I'm sorry.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because 35% of the children in our country today are being raised without a dad. Yeah. And it's part of that's part of what's wrong with our country, is that the breakdown of the family, and I'm not just talking about deadbeat dads. Guys that you get your girlfriend pregnant and you skip town and you're a turd. Mm-hmm. But there's dads that come home every day from work, but they're not invested in the lives of their son. If you watched Ric Flair's documentary, which by the way aired the same night,
oh my goodness,
for whatever reason, it aired the same night on the 30/30, and God bless Rick. At the end of that, they asked him, "Well, how do you want to be remembered?" And he says, "Well, I obviously won't be remembered as a good husband or father, so I guess I'd like to be remembered as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time." And he was and has been one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. But that's sad, because and I've known Rick, and Rick's a friend, but I knew for a long time that Rick was adopted. What I didn't know until I watched that 30/30 was that he had a very poor relationship with his dad. And I think that a lot of Rick's antics and wanting to be the center of attention and the woo man is it's him crying out for, it's like saying, "Hey, look at me. Yeah. And of course I'm not an expert, but and again, I love Rick. Rick's recently been through hell, almost died, and has made a tremendous comeback, and happy for him.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see him at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
How much of your success and like Rick's success do you chalk up to having like a tumultuous childhood in that fashion? Jeff and I talk about it a lot, where like sometimes maybe the best circumstances being raised in doesn't quite make the best character, and sometimes we have to go through a lot of hardship to be these giant characters like Ric Flair.
Well, because I speak to a lot kids, and I tell them, I said, we're not, you're not a product of your environment. You're not a victim of your environment. What you're a victim of are the choices you make in the environment. And I said, here's the thing. I said, just like in a card game, you can't choose the cards you get. Mm-hmm. You have to play the hand you've been dealt. Yeah. And life's not fair, and bad things happen, and parents divorce, or you don't know your dad, or you don't know your mom, and or you blow it, and so what are you going to do? You come up in a poor neighborhood. That was my dad's story. He was Italian, grew up in a very poor Italian neighborhood, and but he went to the University of Nebraska. Well, first he went to the Navy. And in the Navy, I think it was 1946, AAU National Heavyweight Wrestling title as a heavyweight. And then went to Nebraska, graduated from Nebraska, lettered at Nebraska 8 times, 4 years in football, 4 in wrestling, and was a conference heavyweight champion for 3 years, 3 consecutive years.
Wow.
So that coming out of poverty, and which was an inspiration to me.
Yeah.
And that's where that's part of my story. I got a break because I lost my parents divorced when I was 2. Yeah. My mother remarried when I was 5, and she married Mike, and I had that influence in my life for 10 years, and it just stayed with me. And he died. It was you watch the documentary. I'd go out to that cemetery where he's buried countless times, and but I remembered some of the things that he told me. I tell kids that. It's like, it's easy to do what everybody else is doing. He says, but it takes strength to cut your own path in life. Be the head, not the tail. Be a leader, not a follower. And he said, if you work hard, if you're willing to pay the price, you can be whatever you want to be. And I followed that, and it led me to success.
Yeah, and it definitely did. And going back into the beginning of your career as a wrestler, I'm always curious because, you started out in the 70s when the sport was just at the beginning of starting to get like almost a pop culture sensibility. This television was picking it up. It was really starting to be, a larger than life kind of thing. And I wanted to what was it like to be in the wrestling community, especially moving into the 80s when things like, not only when you were wrestling, in like the Mid-South and stuff like that, but like when, early WWF was becoming this powerhouse thing. Was it like instantaneous, or did you kind of feel that take off as you were kind of gradually going into the sport?
Well, again, having been raised in it and what have you, what's funny is that I looked at some of the stuff Vince was doing, and I kind of almost thought it was cartoon.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like he's killing our business. But reality is, it was a stroke of genius. What Vince McMahon did is he took wrestling, which was basically, when you went to put it this way, when you go to the wrestling matches, you're not going to see polo shirts and khaki pants. Back then, anyway.
Right.
Not back then. Back then, it was a rough crowd.
Yeah.
It was a rough crowd, and of course, what Vince did was he just came out and announced to the whole world that, hey, look, we are sports entertainment. Let's quit. Because we always, we understood that. Educated people, you watch it long enough. You've ever been an athlete, been in a fight, you watch things, you go, I can't, but it's kind of like magic. That they can't really make an elephant disappear, but he disappeared. It's
Right.
sleight of hand, and you go, oh my gosh, how'd they do it? Well, that's kind of thing with wrestling back then. It was like, even though it's kind of like walking into a movie, when you walk in, it's not real. Mm-hmm. But if the story is told in a way that it draws you in, then you're captivated by it, suspended disbelief. Yeah. And, but what Vince did was he dressed it up. He made colorful characters, absolute heroes and absolute villains. I was like Snidely Whiplash.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that was the deal. And so, but when I understood where wrestling was going, as I picked the paper up the day after WrestleMania 3 and I read the headlines, wrestling sets indoor world attendance records, 93,000 people at the Pontiac Silverdome.
Wow.
And I said, if I'm going to stay relative in wrestling, then I'm going to have to go there.
Yeah.
And I started that journey.
And before we get into when you got into the WWF and the $1 Million Man era, you've always been celebrated in the sport for your technical prowess, for how you really were an incredible athlete through and through in what you did. And I was curious, like, what was your training regimen like? What was your workout regimen like?
Well, it's funny because with wrestling, I mean, we didn't have days off. We wrestled every day.
Yeah.
I mean, the territory days, I mean, you have to ask for a day off, and it's real hard to get one if you're considered one of the top guys, because if you're a top guy and you're the main event draw, then the rest of the cards is dependent on you to be there. And so, that guy doesn't get very many days off. And so I was wrestling virtually every night of the week, and it's an acquired skill. I grew up loving it. That's part of it. But in terms of, I didn't really start, and it's as obvious. If you go back and look at pictures of me, from the mid '70s to, about the time I went to the WWE, and I was athletic. I played college football, but I never had a great body. I never tried to. And so I started working out more. I started pumping the weights more to get a better, somewhat better physique. But I've never been known as, oh gosh, remember Dibiase, the guy with the six pack? I never had the six pack. So, but I mean, the schedule was rigid. I mean, we would, fly into a town, check into a hotel, get to the gym, get in a good, hour and a half workout, get showered, eat, get a little nap, go to the show. And then, get up the next day, and it depends. A lot of times we would fly into a major city, and then we would work maybe 2 or 3 shows that were within 100 striking distance of that city. And then we would fly out. It just varied. Sometimes we'd be in for one day and gone. So, it wasn't an easy life at all.
Yeah, it doesn't sound easy. How much does coffee come into a factor when you're doing that much work?
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? It's like I live. That's why I love it, because I live on it. It's kind of like, it's like it was funny. My grandmother used to when she ran a truck stop, and that's where you usually find really good coffee, is at a truck stop.
Definitely.
And my affinity for coffee goes all the way back to when I was very young. Between those ages, like when I was 4 and 5 years old, I would hang out a lot at my grandmother's truck stop, and a lot of the regular truckers, they would come in, and I was there. They'd get to know me, and so I'd go over and I'd sit with them, like, "Hey, little buddy, come have a cup of coffee with me." And truckers, they stop, they want their coffee. What the waitresses would do, well, they'd put about just an inch of coffee in the cup, and then they'd fill it with milk and sugar. But I thought I was having my coffee, and and even though I still can't get over that. I love my coffee, but I still, I can't do it black.
Yeah,
I gotta have the.
You've been drinking it like that since you were 4. I'm sure it comes into play. Oh man, that's funny. So let's get to the $1 Million Man. When you joined up with this now larger than life sports entertainment, you become, like you said, the Snidely Whiplash. Like, you become one of the greatest villains to ever grace the ring. And was it? Before that, you were already, all wrestling was doing angles and storylines and that kind of thing, but the $1 Million Man, you were that persona. It seemed 24 hours a day. Was that tough to kind of also be, the technical wrestler that you were, but then also this larger than life character?
Well, that's the thing that I had to. Now, I was a character, and I was a heel character when I worked in Mid-South, but the interviews were more serious. The interviews were more like, I guess they weren't over the top.
Right.
And that was the difference that Vince wanted, that over the top. I still remember I did an interview, and we would do our interviews, every 3 weeks, and they would do them for the next 21 markets, so and so Vince just happened to be walking by when I ended an interview, and I laughed like that. Yeah. And that laugh is basically, an exaggeration of the way I laugh. And so he sticks his head in the door and he goes, "That's the $1 Million Man." Oh. He said, "I want to hear that laugh every time you finish an interview." And so that's, and I tell everybody, I said, you know what, 19-year active wrestling career, noted as a a great technical wrestler and all this other stuff. But what does everybody remember most?
Yeah, oh man, it still gives me
I'll laugh,
every time.
The laugh. So, but the laugh is, that's it. It's nightly whiplash. And so that's what Vince did with wrestling. He animated the characters. I mean, even I wasn't I never was on the cartoon. The cartoon was before me.
Yeah. But
it became family entertainment, and man, it was like going to the circus.
Yeah.
Because there was all this variety of characters. The $1 Million Man, the rich guy with all the money, a guy with a snake. Hillbilly Jim.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my gosh, just a plethora of characters.
Yeah.
Brutus the Barber.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I wonder, nowadays we see a lot of guys biting off that $1 Million Man style where, I swear to God, people just show up to watch these people fight in hopes that they lose, and that is like their draw. But we see a lot of guys, especially I would say Money Mayweather is the best example, biting off your style. Do you think that's like on purpose? They're seeing what you're doing and trying to mimic it, or do you think, you kind of tapped into something that everybody else is kind of finding out for themselves?
Well, I don't know. I think, they might be finding out for themselves. I mean, there's been at least two guys, especially like JBL. JBL and I are buddies. And I tell JBL, I said, "You are a cowboy version of me." But he's, because, again, it's the same, genuinely, the same character. Rick's rich cowboy comes rolling in, in a big Cadillac deal and talking about his money, kind of like, what was that old show on TV with the Dallas?
No, Dallas, yeah.
So JBL was kind of that. He was a similar character and a heel, and a guy who talked big, and then, when you confronted him, he'd become a coward. It's kind of, it's a bully. It's like my character bullied people with my wealth, and you never get tired of seeing a bully get his butt kicked.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's true. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that with Mayweather yet.
No, that's true.
So did you get this persona from somebody? Like, were you inspired to have this angle from somebody else before?
Well, no. This was brand new, and it was Vince McMahon's personal idea. And I guess because Vince had seen me in action and seen some of my interviews and what have you, he just thought I was the perfect guy for it. And so they brought me up to New York, interviewed me, and the rest is history.
As you grew the character, though, were you able to give your input into the character, or any like the storylines or angles that subsequently came with it?
Well, a little bit. I mean, Vince always, and again, I remember he always said, "No, I'm not like I don't want everybody to always agree with every. It's like I don't expect that." Mm-hmm. He says, "If you don't like something, tell me, but don't come like a cabbage, all head, no rear."
Yeah.
And he says, in other words, if you don't like something, tell me that, but then tell me what we can do different.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good angle. That's really good angle.
But he also said, but remember this, at the end of the day, we're spending my money. And as long as we're spending my money, at the end of the day, we're going to do it the way I want it. So, but he was always pretty good about, I mean, sometimes he liked it, sometimes he didn't. That's business in any business.
Yeah. I'm sure, the countless arcs that you were a part of, the countless fights that or matches and things. I'm sure there's tons of stories out there that you've told multiple times. But is there any angle or storyline that you think fondly back on from that time that kind of enjoyed being that character and got to do?
Well, the one thing that they did, the one angle that was shot that I just think was one of the greatest ever, was the one that really catapulted me to being a big star, and that was when Market Square Arena, Saturday night main event on NBC, and it was the first time that professional wrestling had been on live network television since the 1950s. And the match was the first time that Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant had gotten back in the ring since WrestleMania 3, where Hulk won.
Yep.
But the story was that I had bought the services of Andre. Andre was going to beat Hogan and sell me the title.
Yeah.
My whole deal was I can buy everything, including the world title.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't know until that night that Dave Hebner had an identical twin. And so twin referees, and it was just great. One referee goes down and he's out, and his identical twin runs down there to the ring, and Andre does something to Hogan and goes down and covers him, and the referee goes 1, 2, and Hogan's shoulder's 3 feet off the mat. The referee just goes ahead and counts 3, rings the bell, and gives the belt to Andre, declares him champion. Andre brings me in the ring, wraps the belt around my waist, and I carried the belt for, I guess, probably a week or maybe a week and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the then acting, storyline, Jack Tunney, the president of the WWF, declares default, you're not the champion because you didn't win the belt. We can't give it back to Andre because he won't take it, because he technically won it.
Yeah.
And he's been paid off, and we can't give it to Hogan because he technically lost it. So what do? We have a tournament to declare a new champion, which was WrestleMania 4.
Yeah,
it's genius.
Yeah,
it's pure gold.
Yeah.
One of the greatest storylines ever, for sure. And I gotta ask the question because you saying the words "larger than life" obviously comes to mind, Andre the Giant, and we've all heard stories of him and that kind of thing. But for someone like you who got to work so closely with him, especially in a storyline like that. Is he everything that everybody always says? Was he? What was he like in real life?
He was great.
Yeah.
He was a kind guy. He was a good guy. Now there's some fans that might not agree with that, but those are usually fans that are taken for granted. Andre's 7'4", 450. He couldn't hide anywhere.
No.
And so it's like. The one thing that Andre was always looking for was a place to be comfortable and not be bothered, because people would just hound him. And I found this out by traveling with him. I could put on glasses and a hat if I wanted to, and maybe get by, but no, or even in a crowd, I might not be spotted, but everybody's going to notice Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
And so, you add celebrity to that, and it was like, wow. I mean, I can remember a night we were in a restaurant / pub having dinner, and this lady comes up, and she's wanting autographs, and I was the buffer. I said, ma'am, if you would be willing to wait outside, be happy to sign your autographs. And she started with it. Well, we bought these tickets and we bought all this merchandise and blah, blah, and we spent our money and invested our money in it. And I said, and you know what, lady? I said, you got what you paid for. I said, but because you did that doesn't give you the right to interfere in a man's private time.
Yeah.
And just showing a lack of respect. And so, so I saw that on numerous occasions. But I'm going to tell you, for people, and this has happened to Andre, it's happened to me. I've walked out of a restaurant and had somebody stop me and say, Mr. Dibiase, we spotted you come in, but we didn't want to bother you, and we waited.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get my autograph. They're going to get a picture. They're going to get anything they want because they showed me that respect.
Nice.
You know, and that would be the only time that I would say Andre was not seen as a really nice guy. And, you know, that would be a time when nobody would, but he was a prince of a guy, a gentle giant. And, you know, I just had a blast with him.
And you worked with him a lot. What was your relationship like with Andre?
Oh, it was great. It was great. I mean, I met Andre when I was still in college playing football in West Texas. You know, where there's a whole bunch of wrestlers who went to West Texas State University. It's called West Texas A&M now, and largely due to the influence of the Funk family, Terry Funk. Well, Terry Funk's dad, Dory Funk Sr., was the promoter there, and of course Dory Funk Sr., Terry Funk. So let's see if I can run this list down for you.
All right.
Bobby Duncombe, I don't know if you guys remember him, but Bobby Duncombe he played football at West Texas State and was a top wrestler in regional wrestling. Okay, Bobby Duncombe, both Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk. Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody.
Whoa.
And then after Stan and Bruiser came myself, Tito Santana, and Tully Blanchard. We were all on the same team.
Oh, wow.
And then Kelly Kaninsky, who was Gene Kaninsky's son. And, you know, he didn't stay in the business long, though. And then a guy named Manny Fernandez is another guy. And Barry Windham.
Wow.
All of those guys, they just weren't in wrestling, all except maybe one of them or two of them were gigantic stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they all came out of West Texas.
Wow, that's crazy.
But anyway, I was at West Texas State, and that's where I met Andre. He came to town, and the Funks asked me to take him out. You'll love this story. And so after the show, I took him to like a place where all the college kids went, and we sat down, and the gal comes to take our order, and Andre says, "Do you have trash can?" And she says, "Yes, sir. We have several big trash cans." And she says, "I want you to empty a trash can." And he said, "I want you to fill it with beer and ice." Like put four cases of beer, whatever. I can't remember now. And she kind of looked at me like a wide eye, and I said, "Yeah, do it." And of course, if you looked at him, if he wrapped his hand around a beer can, you couldn't see it. I mean, it was like you or me, you know, those little miniature cans.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like us wrapping our hand around one of those. But I mean, you literally, you know, he wraps it. I mean, it looked like a toy cup, and just, you know, and that's most of what I remember that night.
I'm glad you remember some of that night.
Yeah. That's a night I would have needed a lot of Death Wish coffee. Oh my gosh!
At least the morning after.
But Andre was. He could put it away, and you know, and he's been known to. But you know, in all the years I traveled with him, I never saw him out of control. I never saw him obnoxious ever.
Wow.
So, and what a lot of people don't know is that, you know, he didn't like taking pills. He didn't like pain pills. You know, he didn't like drugs at all. I mean, he was so anti-drug, marijuana, and the whole deal. So when he was in pain, he killed his pain by drinking.
Yeah.
And you know, he got to where he drank mostly wine, but again, I never saw him, but it was a painkiller.
Yeah.
You know, the guy was he was 49 years old when he died.
Yeah.
And that was about the life expectancy of guys with that condition. I think that's changed. I know, like Big Show, you know, I don't know what Big Show's taken. There's something now that they said stopped it, where they can stop the, you know, because all of his internal organs continue to grow.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, going forward in your career a little bit, you ended up going on the other side of it, and you became a manager for a while. Did you enjoy that as much as being in the ring?
No.
Yeah.
Nothing was good as you know, being the player in the ring.
Yeah.
But you know, because of a neck injury, you know, I got out of the ring, and you know, and I managed and commentated, you know, for several years, and I enjoyed it. Well, I was still part of the show, part of the business, but no, nothing's as good as being the guy.
Oh yeah.
I'm assuming the neck injury is from wrestling.
Well, it was cumulative. It was like the
Yeah.
doctor told me. He said, the basic bump you guys take is from your feet to your back. And he says, how many times do you do that a night? And I said, oh my gosh. I said, probably at least 15 to 20. How many nights a week? Okay, 7.
Yeah.
And how many years? 18. Well, 19 actually. And so he said it was degenerative. It's like, so the discs, there were 2 discs, C5 and C6, cervical discs that they took out of my neck. And it was from me taking that, because when you take that bump to your back, most of that is absorbed across the top of your shoulders, and right at the top of your shoulders where your spine meets your cervical, your neck. That's where those discs are. And I can tell you 4 or 5 other wrestlers that have had the same surgery I had.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just part of the business.
Did you have to get those discs fused together? Is that what's going on?
Yeah. Well, they take the discs out. And well, when I did it, they took bone plugs from my hip and replaced the discs with the bone plugs.
Wow.
They don't do that anymore. They use something artificial now. And then they fuse it. They put a little plate in there. So, so it won't move.
So the question we ask every single episode of this show, and it's as poignant with you as with anybody, throughout your entire career with wrestling, now with the incredible work you're doing with the ministry, and also the books you've written, the movie, all of that stuff. What fuels you to keep doing what you do?
Well, a desire to, because I'm grateful. I mean, I tell you, when I had to face my wife with the truth, it was the most humbling moment in my life. When I looked in the mirror and saw myself for who I really was, in spite of my fame and the stardom and the money and all that stuff, I was empty. And, because I had no integrity. And, because I now have this desire to give back, because I've been blessed. I've been blessed with an unbelievable career, an unbelievable wife who stuck by my side and gave me a chance to redeem myself. And, so I'm going to keep going. So people ask me all the time, when are you going to retire? And I said, well, I retired from wrestling physically wrestling, when I was 40. I said, but I've never found the word retire in the Bible.
That's true.
So I guess I want to just keep going and doing what I'm doing with the ministry and trying to give back and trying to help people. And I'll keep going until I put me in a wheelchair or I just don't wake up.
Yeah. Well, speaking of grateful, I know, speaking a little candidly, Jeff was adopted, and my parents divorced very early, and I had a rough relationship with my father, and your story is definitely inspirational to people like us, and we're very grateful that you're out there, spreading the good word and helping people out, dealing with those situations themselves and trying to get them on the right foot to begin with. So, a lot of thanks to you, man. Really appreciate that.
Oh, hey, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me on. And most of all, thanks for the coffee, man.
Anytime. We'll
Heck
load you
yeah.
up, brother.
Finally,
Yeah,
for all of our listeners and watchers, what's the best way to follow you? Do you social media? Do you have a website?
I am MDM Ted Dibiase on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if you would just go on and write my name, it would bring up the actual one.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. I do have a public Facebook page, $1 Million Man. And then I also have, the website. Well, I do have $1millionman.com.
Yep.
I have that website. And then the ministry site is HOD, Heart of David Ministries.
Excellent.
And so that's where you can find me and see what I'm doing.
Excellent. Because I know you're very active. You're going all out. In fact, I know this episode will air after it has finally aired, but you're on your way to WrestleMania 34, and that's gonna be some fun stuff too. We cannot thank you enough for taking time to talk with us on the show. It was absolute honor to talk with you.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. And again, thanks for the coffee.
Yeah, man.
and have a caffeine filled day.
Yes,
Yeah, I
yes.
don't know any other way, man.
Yeah,
It's in the air. I breathe it.
This has been Fueled by Deathcast, a Death Wish Coffee Company podcast production. Thanks for listening.